Red Hook, a community wondering what could happen if another Sandy comes along.
Worst hit really were the Red Hook houses, the public housing project, where about half the neighborhood's residents live. Those people lost power for weeks, they lost water, they lost heat.
If the flood comes again.
We need to be ready.
But is the city being realistic about its preparations?
They're about 4 feet high, they're filled with sandbags. This won't stop anything like Sandy, but it's meant to protect against what's called a 10-year flood.
That's why some residents are determined to do what they can on their own.
They see us in the street now and they're like, what's going on next?
When a big storm hits, one type of public transportation could play a crucial role.
Moving people, moving goods, moving food or medicine or products that are needed, or a lot of neighborhoods that can be reached from the water, often within mere hours of a storm or some other kind of incident.
Meanwhile, the new NYC Ferry system is carrying more commuters than expected.
I use a ferry every day.
With the ferry, it's 45 minutes, and before the ferry, it was an hour and 45 minutes.
Hey Cap, are you going to be coming about the starboard or port?
Going round trip on the river.
All for the same price as a subway ride.
How many of you rode your bikes here today?
For those who choose a different kind of ride, the two-wheeled kind, it's all about making the city safer.
I think that there are inherent risks in biking all the time. If my kids can't ride in that bike lane, then it's really not doing what it needs to do.
A bike lane with a barrier might have saved one young man's life.
Matt was a special person, and he was a great person, and it was just really awful tragedy.
He was cycling home from work about 2 a.m.
This week, infrastructure and transportation, as we're going in by land and by sea. How do you make something like infrastructure sexy? Well, you could start by blowing up a bridge. £22 million of steel spanning 1.1 miles. This is one phase of an $825 million project 4 years in the making to replace the nearly 80-year-old Kosciuszko Bridge, which connects Brooklyn and Queens, accommodating some 160,000 vehicles a day. And while Brooklyn's namesake bridge gets the lion's share of the attention, there are 239 other bridges to somewhere throughout the borough. A 2013 report from the Federal Highway Administration found that half of our bridges are in need of serious structural repair. 15 of those were labeled structurally deficient and fracture critical, which is engineer speak for they could fall down at any moment. And it's not just drivers in danger. The MTA employs many of those crossings, and the Q-train bridges have been singled out as among the worst. Pretty sexy now, right? By some estimates, it will take more than $1 billion to make our city bridges roadworthy. But while the bridges were almost falling down, the power grid was on the verge of blacking out. New York State's energy czar compared our energy infrastructure to a mainframe computer in the age of cloud computing. His boss, Governor Cuomo, set a goal that by 2030, half of the energy consumed in the state will come from renewable sources. The governor isn't the only one jumping on the infrastructure express. U.S. Senate Democrats are floating a 10-year, $1 trillion plan to fix everything from roads to broadband service. And though it doesn't allocate one penny for a border wall, even the Republican president is ready to come to the table. It's easy to appreciate that vision, but it's on us to widen the scope. Outdated subway signals, shuttered hospitals, substandard public housing. A coastal city with no resilience plan. lead pipes delivering water to our school fountains. Yep, that's all infrastructure too. While those plans are being laid and funds earmarked, it's our responsibility to be radical in our ask and doggedly determine those projects come to fruition, right here where we live. So what do we need? Let's go in on infrastructure in New York City.
The metropolis of the Western world. To the visitor who comes by land, by air, or from the sea, a romantic panorama of towering spires and massive structures. At Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn, improvements have been undertaken in which are combined many of the important features of the works program. An area which was formerly undeveloped is the scene of a project in which employment is provided for both skilled and unskilled workers. A long bulkhead was built to reclaim land from the waters of the bay.
Red Hook dates back to the 17th century. It was founded by the Dutch. Back then, this was actually a lot of islands. There was a lot of tidal pools. It's very marshy. It was only later on that that was actually filled in. The groundwater is only a few feet down, which has been a bit of a risk for flooding throughout its history. 5 years ago, October 2012, Superstorm Sandy hit New York City, and there were really few neighborhoods that suffered more than Red Hook. It flooded out basements, homes. Nearly the entire neighborhood was submerged. Worst hit really were the Red Hook houses, the public housing projects, where about half the neighborhood's residents live. Those people lost power for weeks. They lost water, they lost heat. And it's only now that that damage is really being repaired in any way, and they're really, in some ways, as vulnerable as they ever were before.
We are traumatized by it. We take things for granted every day. Water and electricity is something we take for granted. We coped with it after a while, and we were able to tolerate it for, 29 days? When Sandy happened, we all organically helped and instinctively helped each other. We knew, like Marissa lives down the hall from me, and I know she has an elderly grandmother, so she and I were able-bodied. We could run up and down the 7 flights of steps, bringing up water and food and supplies for the whole floor. It took a while before we got real response. Outside of Red Hook Initiative, there wasn't too much going on. Red Hook Initiative has been here for about 15 years now.
After Sandy, this was the go-to place. Everybody came here to get food. If you needed water, if you needed to make a call, you needed to charge your phone, everything was here. It's serious, We are so in the boondocks, it's hard for people to get to us. So God forbid something happens like this again, we need to be ready.
So Superstorm Sandy did about $19 billion of damage to New York City as a whole, and the city almost immediately decided to not just repair the damage that had been done, but to try to build back in a stronger way. The city has said it will spend about $20 billion altogether on recovery and resilience. Red Hook is definitely a huge part of that. What you're seeing to my left here, they're about 4 feet high, they're filled with sandbags, and they're sort of a temporary flood wall that will help prevent minor flooding. This won't stop anything like Sandy, but it's meant to protect against what's called a 10-year flood, which actually means a flood that has about a 10% chance of happening in any given year.
Those sandbags are gonna kind of prevent the water from coming in. There's nothing that could prevent Mother Nature from doing whatever she's gonna do. Thank God for Red Hook Initiative and coming up with the local leader plan.
The local leaders program provides training for residents in how to respond and how to be responsive in emergency situations. So for example, we are taught CPR and basic first aid. When Sandy first happened, we provided aid, but we weren't skilled. Now you have 200 people who are skilled to assist you.
The experience of Superstorm Sandy really drove home that protection isn't just about building flood walls or building hard infrastructure, but about the strength of a community. We can't build walls that will protect us against every storm that will happen, that will protect us against a world where sea levels continue to rise. So it's really going to be up to neighborhoods and communities to sort of build some of those bonds now to ensure that when the next disaster happens, whether it's a storm or something different, the community can really come together for each other, can help support each other, and Red Hook has begun to do that.
They see us in the street now and they're like, what's going on next? When is the next set of workshops? What are you all doing? We want to know everything you know. And I hardly know anything, and I just learned some of this stuff. And you know how hard it took for me to say resiliency? And resiliency is a hard word to sell when you're door knocking and doing outreach.
They're like, what?
It felt good that people received us well.
When I think of the word of resiliency, I think of myself. Going through that experience, sometimes mentally, you don't know if you're really gonna be able to get through it, especially knowing that it's gonna happen again. And doing these local leader classes, I just feel so strong that I got this. And I really believe that my community got it too. You live and you learn. And we've definitely learned, and we're still learning.
What can compare with the thrill of a brand new bike? Those long days of wishing and waiting are finally over, and the proud new owner can look forward to enjoying his bike in many ways.
Matt was intelligent and incredibly kind and funny. Yeah, he was a great guy. I mean, he rode his bike everywhere. That was pretty much the only way he got around the city by choice. He believed very strongly in the idea that cycling was the best way to get around New York and any other city or town.
I've been fortunate enough to divide my time between Minneapolis and Paris. His father and I were living in Columbus, Ohio at the time that he was born. We had an old farmhouse and 5 acres. He was incredibly outgoing and confident and adventurous. He was an only child, and he had an incredible impact on people that he came in contact with. When he died, the outpouring was just amazing.
Matt was a special person, and he was a great person, and it was just really awful tragedy.
I always marveled at how outgoing he was, as well as how good he was with everybody. He was just really good. He was really good with kids, and I was really hoping that someday he would be a dad, because he was going to be a great one.
Very involved in advocacy, and I work on a local level, and then I'm also part of a political action committee where we try to get elected officials that are pro-safe streets. To me, if my kids can't ride in that bike lane, then it's really not doing what it needs to do. And anybody of any skill level should be able to ride in a bike lane. I think that there are inherent risks in biking all the time. You can hit a pothole and you can go down. That hurts, but if you hit a pothole, go down and then the car runs over you, that's a whole different story. What a bike lane should do, what infrastructure should really do is make it safe enough for anybody to ride. 8 to 80. If you're 8 to 80 years old, you should be able to ride on a bike lane.
Here today is for Mayor de Blasio. Make life-saving street designs the standard. How many of you rode your bikes here today?
It is imperative that we relinquish this mindset that our streets are made for cars only. We must fix the mindset that we have, that vehicles are not weapons when they are weapons, and when you speed in the manner and drive reckless in the fashion you do so, is no different than having any other illegal weapon that takes the lives of innocent people.
Junior, age 52. Unidentified man, age 53. Abraham Shmala, age 56. Darton.
He was cycling home from work about 2 a.m., went across the Williamsburg Bridge, a route that he knew well. He was in the bike lane. His bike had a light. A black Camaro was behind him for almost a quarter of a mile. The car sped up, went around two other cars, was then partially in the bike lane where Matt was, hit Matt's bike, which knocked him off the bike and into the street, and then the car ran over him and dragged him for 20 feet. Then the driver left the scene.
What was important about the case was that the Brooklyn DA saw it, brought the case, and got a conviction. And the judge gave a very harsh, appropriate sentence in the case. And I think that in itself is a big victory.
His father and I both have been scattering his ashes, talking with one of Matt's friends. She shared a conversation where they had talked about how cool it would be to have your ashes scattered places you've never gotten to visit. He had this bucket list trip where he wanted to bike across Mongolia before he was 40. So I think I'm going to Mongolia next year.
My name is Andy Santana, and I am an NYC captain. I've been driving boats for about 9 years, and it feels almost new every day. There's always something different happening. It's not your typical 9-to-5 job.
NYC Ferry was really born out of, first and foremost, the vision of the City of New York, Mayor de Blasio, the New York City Economic Development Corporation, understanding that there were needs in areas within the city that were transit deserts and could be best served by putting a ferry into service.
It's already made a lot better difference with transportation, as far as getting around faster and not having to deal with traffic inside, the city. My day usually consists of a combination of things. Once I come to work, I make sure my boat's ready to start our run. We're out in the open river, so you're not dealing with as much, the hustle and bustle of the inner city. You can just transition from one point to the other and not have to worry about getting held up, getting stuck in gridlock traffic and stuff like that.
I don't really like the buses. I feel like they're a little slow because of the traffic in New York. Having the ferry is definitely something very useful. I find it a lot better than the train.
There is traffic in the river, but it's not, you know, like the type of traffic that you would have to slow down and stop the boat completely. It's always, you slow down, but you can still keep the schedule.
New Yorkers historically, when the city first founded a few hundred years ago, traveled between the boroughs via ferries. And it's really exciting to be able to bring back something that people may perceive as an old mode of transit that's refreshed through app connectivity, onboard concessions, an amazing crew to be able to connect areas now that have historically been forgotten through public transit.
The idea was to create a new form of transit that would connect neighborhoods that historically have not had access to quality and affordable public transit. So, we're talking about neighborhoods like Red Hook, neighborhoods like Astoria in Queens, places where you have a lot of New Yorkers living in public housing and, neighborhoods that people really need not just transit options, but really affordable transit options.
I commute from Rockaway to Brooklyn Army Terminal. With the ferry, it's 45 minutes, the commute, and before the ferry, it was an hour and 45 minutes commute for me.
How's it going, bud? Good. I'll see you more. Thank you. Got you inside. Absolutely.
We're getting more and more riders, and you can, with the customers you see, you kind of get to recognize their faces, so they're dependent on us.
I use a ferry every day, and it is a delight. I enjoy using it.
Since our launch in May 1st of 2017, we've carried more than 2.25 million riders. That's more riders than any of us expected.
One of the biggest priorities for the de Blasio administration when we planned this route was to make sure that we were serving New Yorkers that have lived in neighborhoods for, in some cases, generations and have lacked access to transit.
I think as many options as you have, it's better. I mean, Subway is great. Bus, I never tried bus, but the ferry is definitely good, and having more would be just better.
Just getting around, it seems like there's always traffic, and the subway, it's just kind of a nice alternative to it.
Hey Cap, are you going to be coming about the starboard or port?
I'm going to be coming to the port.
Some of the customers, they live near water, so it's probably a lot easier with our boats to transit from one area to the other than dealing with other sources of transportation that might be a little less dependable.
Over the years, when there have been everything from power outages to the horrific events of 9/11 or Hurricane Sandy, the maritime community has been called into action to be able to help support the other modes and traditional modes of public transportation to alleviate strains and help get people mobilized and off the island.
New York City is really a city of islands. We're surrounded by water, and so there are a lot of neighborhoods that can be reached from the water, often within mere hours of a storm or some other kind of incident of moving people, moving goods, moving food or medicine or products that are needed, and NYC Ferry can really play an important role in that.
Through this project, through this expansion, that resiliency and flexibility and additional options have only increased now for the city of New York.
We're going to be launching 2 new routes next year, one connecting all the way up to Soundview in the Bronx, one connecting the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and so people in Brooklyn and really all over the city are going to be able to access even more neighborhoods, all for the same price as a subway ride.
Thank you for going in with us on infrastructure by land and by sea. We're coming to you now from a downtown Brooklyn transit hub right outside of the Barclays Center on a rainy rush hour. But the city don't stop, and neither will we. So keep your suggestions and story ideas coming. If you missed anything or you want to check it out again, you can always find past episodes of Going In and any fine products we produce at BRIC TV at our home on the web at youtube.com/BRICTV. We'll see you next time. But until then, here's some stuff blowing up.